Hey folks, Matt Gladman here, and I'm back with another fantasy map tutorial. Today, we're gonna go over a variety of ways of how I draw towns and cities that you can use for your next fantasy map project. And don't forget, please subscribe, like, or comment on this video. Let me know what you wanna see me draw next. Anyways, let's go sketch. First, I'm gonna use a ruler to create a line for the foreground. I'm gonna use this to keep all my foreground buildings balanced. And then we're gonna start things off with a simple farming village. It'll be basic huts with thatched roofing. This first structure has more of a rounded roof compared to this next hut with an angular peaked roof. And then I lay out a second ruler line for the background. And that's where I'm gonna be placing all my background huts so that they're kind of staggered with depth. And because there's a couple layers of straw on these thatched roofs, I'm adding in this textured ridge to give it that layered look. And then to finish it off, we've got a rudimentary farm fence made of wood. And there we go. I think 4 structures makes a village. And if you're gonna be using a design like this for a farm village on your fantasy map, feel like it's small enough that it looks like a farming village icon, but also has some detail to it. Keep it interesting. And then we'll polish it off with ink, going in carefully and just tracing out our pencil lines, keeping it clean and simple. I'm using a pretty fine point tip here. I think we got a 005 on my Micron pen, if I'm not mistaken. And I'm just using pressure for the thickness of my lines. If I push a little bit harder and dig in a bit, that'll give me thicker lines. And then if I just lightly brush over, it gives me nice, thin, fine lines. Now we're moving on to our next settlement, a city. For this first structure, sticking with that same rounded door and a couple of windows, but I'm gonna make the roof a little more accented here with this little bit of a rounded overhang above the door. Bringing in that ruler again, getting my background line for all my background structures. And for the second structure, I'm thinking this will be like a blacksmith or something. So making it a little bit bigger, but then I'm also adding in this large chimney here and a second story window. And then over here, we've got another multi-storied building. This, I'm thinking it'll be like a tavern and an inn or something like that. So I made the ground floor a bit of a smaller footprint, and the second story overhangs a little bit, and I added in a balcony here. And then let's add in a tavern sign. And for this, I added in a third ruler line for a building even further staggered in the background. I'm just trying to think of different designs for each structure to keep it varied and dynamic. And then for the last building I'm gonna add in, we've got a bit of a tower here. So this could be a bell tower, guard tower, watch tower, anything like that. And again, I keep the ground level footprint a bit smaller. And then as we get to the higher levels, it sort of overhangs a bit. I feel like that's a classic medieval structure look. And then to finish it up, instead of a fence, we're moving on to the low stone wall that surrounds this city. Just doing some basic stone posts and then a concave face that connects the posts. And I added in a little bit of stone texture for the cope stones along the top. Then moving on, I ink in the rest of the city. Include a little bit of texture for the wood planks on the doors. As well as a little bit of dot work on this blacksmith's chimney to really give it that stone look. call these 2 human settlements. Now, let's move on to our next city, and we're going to change up the design a little bit here. As you can see, I'm making the roof a little bit more scooped and curved inwards, as well as some of the walls a little more angled, tapering out as they rise up from the foundation, as you embrace a little bit more of a fantasy vibe in this settlement. The windows are a little more rounded, the roofs are a little more scooped and rounded as well, and the walls kind of taper out from the foundation. And as you can see, we're doing some really big curved windows here as a unique part of our design. We're finishing it off with more of an eclectic looking watchtower, as well as the city walls. They're going to be a little more intricate in design. Again, embracing curved, arched, and rounded design here. And then let's carefully ink it in, following the path we laid in pencil. And if you hadn't guessed already, we're going to call this an Elven city. And in a future video, I'd really like to explore just drawing some Elven cities, particularly ones where its architecture kind of blends seamlessly with the surroundings, whether it's forest or mountains or a coastal region. So make sure to check back for an exclusive tutorial video on drawing all things Elven. Okay, now we're on to our last city. And again, we're going to change it up a bit this time with another unique design. For this, I'm really accentuating the foundation for these buildings. So you'll see the foundation that I built is just these small little tapered in lines that I bring across, and we're going to call that our foundation. This is a bit of an aesthetic choice for this particular city. And I'm also trying to change up the roof design a little bit here, more flat looking rooftops. And I'm going to follow that design choice through on most of these buildings. And I made this arched doorway that intersects with our foundation, but when I go in with pen, I gotta make sure that I don't follow that foundation line through, because that line is not gonna go through this door frame. So I'm just making a mental note of that. Our last structure is gonna be another tower. This one I put 2 windows at the top, but then I added in these decorative grooves at the bottom. I think those kind of decorative designs are called flutes. And then a final piece, the city wall. I want it to look like a sturdy stone wall. So I'm just doing a bunch of rectangular shapes here, keeping it real simple, but also cohesive with the design of the rest of the city. And then let's do our final inking pass on this drawing. really wanted all these buildings to look like smooth stone, so I just included a little bit of random dot. And I bet you guessed it, this is what I would call a Dwarven city. And here's a final look at what we drew today. And as you can see, I added in a little bit of texture on the rooftops. For the thatched straw roofs on that farming village, I just added in a little bit of line work. And for the city, I wanted it to look like shingles. So I added in some vertical downward lines, and then I just cross-hatched it with some small horizontal lines. And then for the Elven city, I went with these U-shaped shingles just to switch it up a bit. And I feel like it adds to that Elven design. All right, we went over 4 different fantasy towns and villages that you could use for your next fantasy map project. And please, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. All right, until next time.